Yep.
You are now recorded.
Right. I'm wondering if we should just like run through just names and organizations real quick since we're recording now, so we have that for the future. Is that okay?
I'll start with me. This is Amanda Martirana at Everyone Graduate Center, and I am your background support.
Right. Okay. Jeff, do you want to go? You're next on my screen. I'll just start calling people out.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Jeff Watson. I'm an independent contractor right now. I was formerly with an ed tech company called Who Knew It, and before that it was called VersaFit. Took the summer off, fished, and coached a lot of baseball. And before I was at VersaFit, I was at UW-Madison for, I think, 9 or 10 years.
Right. Maybe everybody could also put their burning question out on the table. I think it's wonderful to hear about our experiences and to share, because as you'll remember, what we are doing is building a network for next fall, next October, where we're going to share more broadly. And one of the key pieces of that is building the network among ourselves. But I would love it. Jeff, if you wanted to say, you know, one sentence, 2 sentences, what are your key interests?
What really I've been after my whole career is looking at the intersection between technology and the work that people do, and understanding how do we make the work better with the technology and avoid forcing the work to fit the technology.
Cool. Excellent. All right, the next person on my screen is SOECSOS. Will you announce who you are?
It's Amanda Martirana, Sarah.
Oh, sorry.
You're totally fine. And SOE is School of Ed, for anybody who's curious. CSOS stands for the Center for Social Organization of Schools, which is where the Everyone Graduates Center is housed. So, sorry about that.
That's all right. Thanks for that clarification. The next person I have is a number 202352. That's somebody?
That's me. I'm
Joanna. Joanna,
Deputy Director of Everyone Graduate Center. Fascinated by all of your work and really hoping that we can synthesize across different states and districts what are the common data things we need to be looking for. And something happened. Sorry about that again. I don't know what's going on. Anyways, what we're really charged with now is we've been dealing with for the last couple of years. How do we do data internally in school districts? And now we're looking at the data between school districts and universities and colleges so that we know more about how our kids are progressing. Okay, so that's my current interest.
Excellent. All right, the next person we have is 423-265-9403. Will you introduce yourself?
Hey, this is Dan Challoner, Public Education Foundation, and with me is Keith White, who's Director of Research and Evaluation, and sitting in with us is Timothy Barzak, who's helping us with the Predictive Analytics project.
And Dan, what are your key ideas and interests?
Well, on this call, one of the things we know we are absent at looking at the employment data, and I think that's something that would be new and to us, but we're also in a unique position where we have K-16 data, and we're trying to understand what the college data tells us about high school and vice versa. And so I think that's our key interest right now.
Okay. And you've laid out a challenge for all of us, because figuring out the employment data and what it tells about the 20 to 30% of kids who aren't going on into higher ed is something that, you know, germane to all of us.
Yeah.
Next person.
All right. And PES Chattanooga? And some of these might be duplicate. I'm just trying to figure out.
Yep, that's a duplicate. We're watching on computer but listening on phone.
Gotcha. Great. All right, Francis, you're next.
Okay. Francis Dumas-Hines from the Evansville-Vanderburgh School Corporation in Evansville, Indiana. And I guess my burning question is just logistically how we will extend beyond, you know, our internal kind of early warning systems to more of we are incorporating communities, employment, and how do we track that data? What do we specifically look at? What are even, particularly for me, what are indicators of success when we really start incorporating that data?
All right, lovely. Kathleen, I think that you're next on my screen.
Let me unmute here. Hi, so this is Kathleen Barfield, and I'm with WestStat, and I've worked in education data issues all my adult life practically, and I'm very interested, as several of you mentioned, about sharing data between different agencies, and not just education agencies, but also for our more vulnerable kids, the ones that go on to the juvenile justice system or have other, you know, challenges in life, and how do we understand what pathways they're on, and what pathways do they maybe have back into the, you know, educational system at a later point in their life?
Yeah, that's a great question, thinking about the more vulnerable populations.
Yeah.
Darren, I have you next.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Pleasure to be here. My background is I was a 30-plus year public educator in the state of Alabama, the last 10 as a superintendent of education in 2 separate districts. Since that time, I have done some work as a leadership consultant to the University of Mobile. I am now, I have a company, we actually an educational research strategic consulting firm. I had the opportunity to learn more about pathways to adult success through a project I worked with called the Helping Families Initiative. Had a chance to go to Baltimore, I guess several months ago, was very intrigued by the work that you all have going on. So my intent today is to simply learn more about this initiative and how I might be and how my group might be a part of the process. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Great, wonderful, thank you. How about we go with Jenny next? Jenny Scala.
Hi everyone, this is Jenny Scala. I'm with American Institutes for Research. I'm happy to say that right now, all of my burning questions have already been addressed. I think one of my bigger burning questions is how do we make sure people are using data, and then also not assuming that data are the answer. And so kind of that balance of let's be smart about our data and recognize where we need to not rely on the data. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Yeah, I think so. Data only gets you so far without that human touch and that human element, right?
Yep, yep.
All right, I see R. Harrison. I think you're on mute.
There you go. Hi, sorry I'm running a little late joining the call. Rich Harrison, I'm the Chief Academic Officer for Uplift Education, a charter network serving just under 20,000 students in mostly low-income communities in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Just really excited about this work around data. We've been kind of highlighted for some of our data practices around just visualizations for teachers and leaders. We were part of the work over the last few years at Harvard around this. And then just most recently, we've really done some dynamic data work, really pulling in college readiness indicators and creating like an internal match tool to help our students get to college. So really, I'm just really excited to learn from all of you and see how we can, kind of collaborate and share and get more people to use data to make great decisions for the kids that they serve.
Great, wonderful. Carolyn, do you want to go next?
No, Southern Ireland's a great college readiness data.
Hi, I'm Caroline Marks with Metro Nashville Public Schools, a data analyst in our research department. And I know our district is not new to this work, but I personally am, so we'll have probably a lot of questions, but none right now.
Okay. Excellent. How about Sam? Sam, you're muted right now if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
There you go.
I was trying to click the right place. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Rauschenberg, also new to the group, although I work at Achieve Atlanta and our organization has been a part of the work. I serve as Vice President for Data Strategy. And previously, before this job, I joined in January. I worked in the state of Georgia for the kind of P20W longitudinal data system. Was one of my portfolio work. And so linking together that data at the state level, and now obviously looking much more deeply at the local Atlanta level. We provide scholarships to low-income Atlanta public schools, students to go to college, and then a coach to get them through college. Big area focus of my work right now is around predictive analytics and using that to help our coaching be more proactive instead of reactive, and then around match and fit as well, like what Rich mentioned.
Okay, excellent. Ed Eldridge?
Good afternoon. Ed Eldridge here with Vincent Harris from Sacramento City Unified School District. And you could say that our one of our primary initiatives right now is looking at how do we measure the intersection between K-12 grade level readiness and college and career preparation, looking at that from an academic as well as an SEL perspective. So we're looking at it, want to make sure that we're looking at the whole student, but not so much for the cliche. We're looking at their skill, both academically as well as how they, their soft skills.
Excellent. All right, how about Nathan Flint?
Hi, I'm the manager of undergraduate analytics here at National Louis University in Chicago. My interest lately, a lot of the projects I'm working on right now are sort of conspiring to make me really interested in the assessment of specific skills and objectives kind of embedded within a curriculum, how to drive that towards retention, and specifically how to effectively and sort of responsibly embed some early career experiences in a college bachelor's level curriculum to drive kind of success in either achieving employment or sort of a meaningful continuing education experience after after that undergraduate experience, but without kind of putting up additional retention and matriculation barriers throughout that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Monique, do you want to go next? And you're on mute.
Hi. Yeah, sorry. Hi, I'm Monique Gagne from San Jose Unified in California. And besides focusing on AP, IB participation and performance, we've also been focusing on increasing A through G and having up-to-date metrics for that. So A through G is essentially the minimum courses that you need to take and pass to be able to apply to a state school in California. So trying to make sure and track how many students are on that track to be there, and working with those students.
Gotcha. Thanks, Monique. How about Philadelphia Ed?
Hi, this is Liz Nolan. I'm the Senior Program Manager for the Philadelphia Post-Secondary Success Program, and also on the call is our VP of Programs, Kimberly Steffens. We have many different programs that work together in synergy to really build pathways to college and career success for our students. My program, primarily, we provide indirect support to schools to really identify what the, I guess, gap areas are and the assets that the schools have in terms of college and career readiness. And we really work to try to create and sustain college and career going cultures in those schools. And we're new to this group. Kim and myself, our president and CEO, Farah Jimenez, has been a part of this group. So we're just here to learn more about the initiative and how we can really be involved and have impact in our schools. We also have a college access program that provides direct service to over 1,300 students. They provide academic advising, financial aid, advising, and workshops within the schools as well.
Okay, thank you. Nick Chitwood?
Hi, my name is Nick Chitwood. I'm a data coordinator at the Riverside County Office of Education. We are focusing on providing support to districts within our county, but I think one of our other projects is that the state of California has recently transitioned to a new accountability system. And so we're thinking about ways in which we can help to visualize and communicate that to stakeholders within and outside the county. So, it's complicated trying to explain the new system. So we're trying to come up with some alternatives from the way the state has put out the data that might help parents, teachers, staff to better interact with that data.
Oh, nice. Okay, and then I've got Alan and Ann left. Alan, do you want to go first?
Sure, Alan Richard. I'm an education writer based in Atlanta. I'm working with Johns Hopkins and Everyone Graduate Center. And excited to be here, and thanks for everybody's participation.
Thanks, Alan. Ann, do you want to introduce yourself real quick? Ann? Okay. Well, I know she's on, but she's on mute right now. So we'll let her introduce herself. She's working with Johns Hopkins as well on the agenda. Joanna, thank you guys all for introducing yourselves. I know that takes a while, but it's really nice to hear who all is on the call and that broad group of stakeholders that we've got joining us.
Sarah, it's wonderful to hear them all, and I hope you will also insert a couple sentences about your work at Ed Northwest, because what we're doing, and if you listen to all the tags people introduced, we're from all over the country, and each of us is working within different state constraints, is probably the best way to put it. And districts as well. And so we're all bringing different perspectives. But we also know that at the center of our work is using numbers to tell us who we're not doing well by and who we need to do well by and who we are doing well by, and pulling that all together. And then, thinking basically about strategies that we can all undertake. And that involves sharing ideas from across the district, generating ideas. What shall we do in the future? I think personally from this, we don't have enough workforce people. We don't have any workforce people here, to be honest. And we probably should just set that consideration aside for this conversation. We want to bring them in without question. And I'm working to do that. But for today, I would not focus on, what do we and don't we know about where our kids go in the workforce. And there are, if you look at most people's data, and Sam from Georgia can tell you this, because the Governor's Office of Student Achievement in Georgia has done a beautiful database. And my reading of it is about 20 to 30% of the kids are not telling us where they're going after they leave high school. So we know we have that challenge off in the horizon. But for today, let's focus on especially what do we need to do and think about in getting more kids in a post-secondary education and persisting there. So,
yeah.
I'd love to.
Yeah, this is Sarah. I'll just go real quick. So I work at Education Northwest in Portland, Oregon is where we're located, and we work with districts throughout the Northwest region. And I think my burning question is still about these data systems and really thinking about the intervention tracking side of it, because I think that's where the rubber meets the road. And so I hope, even as we're thinking about this transitioning into post-secondary readiness, like what are the services that we can provide these kids and how do we know that they're working? So I hope that that kind of comes out in this conversation as well. Joanna?
Yep, I agree. Let's just take things really quickly, perhaps. You all jump in. I don't want you to be a silent audience. We hope you are vocal participants. Are there, from your perspective, internal considerations that need to be addressed? Or do districts currently have the capacity to do the data? Might be the best way to put it. And are there differences? And I thought Eric Meredith from Montana might be with us, but apparently not. Between larger districts and very small rural ones. Jump in, folks.
I think, and Joanna, if I'm right, I think this one is specifically around that education data sharing and sharing that data across these organizational boundaries, which is really important when we start to think about moving into the post-secondary world of like really connecting into those the university systems and what kind of challenges, I guess, have people seen, or what kind of successes even in trying to create that kind of data system that achieves greater access, enrollment, persistence, and success. Does anybody have any examples?
Well, I can speak about a project working on in Riverside. So we have a grant which is co-written with the University of California, Riverside, and we're just in the beginning portions of that collaboration with them. So we have a data sharing agreement with all of the count. There are 23 school districts within Riverside County. And so we had to execute data sharing agreements with all of them. And because we have access to the aggregated data, we're working with the local university. And so we're just in the very beginning stages of that. One of the things that is becoming a challenge already is that having worked in the way that the data comes out of what's called, so CalPADS is our statewide data management system. So there's a lot of technical issues with just even explaining, somebody at the university level, well, how do you deal with these 11 different files that all have different specifications to actually get at what they're interested in? So there's a lot of capacity building that has to occur with these partnerships, just to even figure out the basic steps of how do you even interpret these files? I think I had an assumption that they would just be able to look at the specifications and kind of just muddle through it, but it's going to be a lot more intense work to even just do the basic work of explaining how to get to the data.
I'll share a similar challenge. This is Rich from Uplift Education here in Dallas, Fort Worth. One of the things that we're trying to do is, we're technically a K-12 school district in the eyes of the state as a charter network. And one of the challenges that I've had on a data front is just accessing the data from Texas's Higher Ed Coordinating Board. They have a ton of data, but it's not organized in a manner that is easily accessible or downloadable into our data stores, right? And I think there's a couple of challenges that we're trying to solve. There's a large part of our student population, our seniors that graduate, about 55%, that go on to what I would consider the tier 2 state institutions. And I have from the federal databases the overall, let's say, 4 to 6 year graduation rates from those institutions. But I would love to get a little bit more granular data from the universities around which schools have the best, let's say, Pell Grant graduation rates by department or by groups of majors, right? So that when we're giving guidance to kids and we're modeling out predictively, we have an idea as to which universities do better with students from underserved communities, which schools do a better job of maximizing kind of what we kind of are starting to measure a return on Pell. And then our biggest challenge is actually our two-year college institutions around the Metroplex, where the graduation rates with an associate's or transferring into a four-year school has, as a kind of a Dallas County, Tarrant County district, has hovered between 10 and 20%. My sense is that we're not doing well on a return for Pell, where community colleges tuition is under the cost of Pell, and so what would it mean for us to really unpack which departments or which campuses or which kind of credit-bearing or non-credit-bearing programs have the most yield, so that we are presenting that information to our counselors and our students and our families, so that they're really making smart decisions and realistic decisions based on historical data. But it's just, again, very cumbersome to navigate some of the PDF and raw data that you can access from kind of higher ed, and we just have to, just think about how we can just visualize that or get that in a raw format so that analysts from our respective institutions can get to work in a more proactive manner.
Yeah. Do you feel like they have access to that data and it's not getting transferred to you, or do you feel like specifically around the Pell Grant? Rates? Yeah.
So in this, they have each year, the Texas Higher Ed Almanac is kind of what they called it. It's re-upped each year, but it's in PDF format. And you can get like at a two-year institution, what is the average graduation rate of a Pell grantee or their average loan debt that they carry on if they graduate. But it's in a PDF format. It is not necessarily on a raw file, nor is it easy to get that specific to the majors within that, let's say, two-year campus. And, and again, like if, one wants to be a teaching assistant or work in early childhood, which campuses have the best return on that would be, that's not something that we found being published in a manner that is really giving great guidance to college counselors.
Yeah, gotcha.
What would be your perspective? What would you like? Let me ask it that way. What would be the simplest format for you to obtain the information in?
Much like California's framework in K-12, we have a kind of a district K-12 framework where, schools are rated from an A to an F here in Texas, right? And I know there are growth measures and performance measures, and there are databases where you can access and look at how kids do on the reading test or the math test. I would like to see that type of easy to access, easy gradable by, let's say, university department, so that if somebody wants to be a business major and they have a choice between a bunch of tier 2 institutions across the state or across our region, they're really informed choices. But my sense is when, let's say, if the graduation rate is higher for, let's say, Hispanic students at institution A over institution B, my sense is there might be a cohort experience or a culture in that department that we need to unpack and understand, so that our students, our first generation students, are making just great choices based on the kind of the return or just the kind of the success rates of underserved students coming from underserved communities. So that's kind of where I would just like just simple raw format data or a simple kind of dashboard that we could just download and integrate into our stores.
Sam, I'm going to put a question to you. Since you've worked at the state level, what do you think the hurdles are in accomplishing what Rick just proposed? What do you think the opportunities are?
Hey, Joanne, I'm going to have to apologize. I actually had to step away to answer a phone call from my wife for about 5 minutes, so I missed that last 5 minutes, and I just sat back down. So if you can summarize what was said, I can certainly weigh in, but I had to take that call.
Well, and Rick, you can jump in if I summarize you wrong, please. Basically, there's a need to know at the school and district level or charter level, whatever, K-12, where kids are going, how they're succeeding, what are they doing, and it needs to be in an easy, and how are they doing in majors, and which institutions are offering the better possibility for those majors, for success in those majors, so that one can then step in with guidance K-12 as to where you might want to think about going. Is that a quick, okay summary, Rick?
Yes, and I'll just I'll just boil it down to like let me just take a college or university that a lot of seniors matriculate into for their freshman year, right? We have 80 to 100 students a year enrolling at University of North Texas. It's a massive institution. It's like 40,000 kids, right? And so if I look at their kind of federal data, let's say on the 6-year graduation rates for Black and Hispanic Pell Grant students, it hovers between, I think, 40 and 50%, depending on kind of that group. And so I know that that is kind of their likelihood of finishing in 6 years if they stick it out at that institution. However, that's just an average of all the students in that group. And let's say it might be higher in certain departments of that institution or certain kind of academic or career tracks within that institution. So, I don't know if the business school there is higher or lower than that average, but let's say if it is higher and they have a track record within that institution for that specific college or department, and they're serving and they're graduating, let's say, Black, Hispanic, first-gen college students at a higher rate than, let's say, other departments. That's something I would like to know so that if there's a student choosing between University of Texas Arlington and University of North Texas and business, that our counselors have that next level of granular data for them to model out kind of the effectiveness of a particular department or a major program versus success rates for those population groups. And really part of this is how do we as an organization, as a K-12 organization, knowing when these kids go off to college, how can we get the best return on their Pell and Stafford loan investments is kind of what we're trying to figure out.
Cool.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And something that we're wrestling with at Achieve Atlanta, and I think you're probably a bit further along on the match side than we are at this stage. But I think that looking at the persistence and comparing, especially those kids that are kind of in that middle range where they're matched to a lot of different colleges, and thinking about how to use the likelihood of persisting, likelihood of earning the credential as part of that. Well, have you looked at this college instead, whether it be automated through the dashboard or something else? But it kind of getting more granular to like the actual program level. I'm not aware of kind of that kind of granularity that would be kind of state level data, at least in Georgia, that it's not put out that way, where it's by program and that kind of thing. But I definitely hear because certainly I can see the very big differences between certain programs and persisting, and how that might change how you'd advise a place like North Texas broadly. So I hate that I don't have much to add on that specifically on how to get those data.
I actually wonder, this is Sarah, I could see an issue with smaller population sizes as you try to really break that down. Obviously, in a huge university, that's not going to be as big of a deal, but particularly for your 2-year universities, generally with data security, we say anything that's less than 10, we don't, like a cell size of 10, we don't want to report that out because you can start to identify those students. And so I wonder if that might be driving some of that kind of real drill down capability. And then, so I'm wondering if anybody else is thinking about that. And then the other part that I was thinking is just, like if you are trying to get that information, if there's some kind of a collaborative or something like that to actually kind of ensure the security of that data if we do want it in that level, because it could be pretty helpful.
I'm curious, Dan and Keith, what your experience in Chattanooga has been, because you're a somewhat smaller location, I would say, kind of 30-some thousand students overall, K-12.
So we can weigh in. We were shaking our heads. We were on mute because we're thinking the granularity of that just is not something that we could get to. We're 45,000 students, just for whatever that's worth. But what we are interested in doing, and we think we will do, is with the case of a couple of institutions with a data sharing relationship. So one being University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, and maybe the other being Chattanooga State, that we could track some of that out to see how students, did over who graduated and from where, right? We could do that, and that would be pretty interesting, but it would not be data sharing across a system. It would be based on relationships, and that's not a great way to build stuff. Keith, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think our best shot right now at that here would be to work backwards from our clearinghouse file. We have close to 2 decades of that information, so we could build, just based on where people have graduated, the degree type and level, and then work backwards from that to kind of get some bands of success by university. But it would be very tough to do it annually, I think, right now.
Mm-hmm. How about Vincent and Ed Eldridge from Sacramento across the country? What do you think? You've been in this business a bit.
So, what part should we weigh in, Ms. Fox, Dr. Fox?
Well, I would say interface with higher ed, and then granularity. And I think what we all haven't raised is whether, or what the usefulness is of granularity. But how about, let's first take this first bite and what's possible currently.
So our district, and I was interested when I heard Nick talk about what Riverside is doing with UC Riverside. We have taken a similar type approach, but you could say that we are looking to take our work to scale. And so we are working as part of a consortium with support from the College Features Association. And we have entered into, I think, some may have known about this, but we have entered into a data sharing agreement with our local institutions, our local universities, UC Davis, Sacramento State, UC Merced, and the entire community college district in our area, Los Rios Community College District. And we are sharing information, we're seeking to share information across our platforms, where we are able to provide visibility on our end to how our students, once they graduate and leave our institution, they matriculate to these institutions, how well they are performing, are they needing remedial work, are they passing their courses, and then vice versa, from the university, our higher institution of higher education partners, they are looking at, for those students who are needing additional work or remediation, what was their academic preparation, or best on the opposite scale, for those students who are doing well and seemingly overcoming odds, what do they have in common, and how do we use that information to help our students going forward? So it's quite a big, pretty comprehensive scope, I'd say. Go ahead.
No, it is pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's pretty.
All of us have to grapple with what is the balance between, looking at the big picture and looking at the details. I'm curious.
And I know I just kind of said a lot there. It's kind of hard to talk. So I'll just, for the whole group, I would say it's kind of hard to talk. It's kind of hard to talk about what we're doing because it's so much. And I say that not from a like we've done it. It's just there's always things going on that you don't know about. and we always have to call on each other and recalibrate and say, are we sure we're doing this right? So it's very much a work in process, but we're just getting to the phase now where we are developing a standard data sharing format that's of use to all parties interested. There's a lot of planning. We've been working at this since October last year, I think. and we're just, sorry?
No, I said that. Yeah, I will tell you that these questions, you know, separately, we've raised the question of a Pathways to Adult Success pilot, and these questions of how long does it take to get something done are of great interest. So I hope you keep notes and reflect on that. Because if we're teaching other folks, as we hope to next year, you know, does it take 3 months, 6 months, 9 months to get from point A to point B? Is a major question.
Yeah, and there's the technical aspect of that, but there's also, you could say, the adaptive aspect of that. Because technically, I think we could all make the argument that if you're within your particular state, you have, I mean, you have students, you have student ID numbers, you have data elements. Technically, it can be done. It's the adaptive piece of how do you convince your partners and your own internal stakeholders to dedicate the resources and to reallocate staff because what you believe that you're going to receive out of this is going to be beneficial on all fronts. So it's the adaptive piece that we have found that requires continual meeting and discussing and going over why we're doing what we're doing and how this is going to benefit.
Mm-hmm. Is that true for other people? The technical aspects you can conquer, but the others are a little bit more challenging.
This is Jeff. From my experience, the technical challenges are a lot less daunting than the social and organizational challenges. Not to say the technical challenges can be they can be challenging. That's a bad expression, but they're not trivial necessarily. But typically, the problems can be defined and solved within the scope that your resources allow. The organizational challenges, they're just harder to get your arms around, and the social aspects in these settings can be turbulent. So, I think whoever was just speaking summed it up pretty nicely. Things change. So you're constantly maintaining, and in some cases, continuing to define what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. At the same time, you've got new people coming on board, new leaders sometimes coming on board. And so it's really important to have strategies that can help you survive those normal types of staff changes, especially at the leadership level. Somebody was speaking earlier about we just need to have the ability to extract data. And I think that's actually a really key strategy for surviving leadership turnover. Leadership turnover is going to happen sooner or later, probably sooner than you want. So, one way to do it is to make sure that as you build out your systems, you're actually building some flexibility into the system, such as with an extract strategy. The downside is that you then expect a lot from your end users about not only how to extract, but how to analyze and parse what they're extracting. So, there is no panacea here. It's a lot of work, but you have to be clear about why are you doing it and how are you doing it, and those decisions along the way.
You've introduced something very interesting, because leadership turnover is something everybody deals with, whether it's school level or district level or even state level. And I don't think, at least from my reading of the literature and experience, and listening to people, that folks have previously raised the idea of permanence in technology, or maybe permanence isn't the appropriate word, but simply having an existing technology infrastructure on the technical side as one of the key ingredients in surviving change. And then would we need to look at human capacity as the second one, because that's also not funded. You know, we look at state funding formulas, and they are looking at teachers, administrators, and counselors, as well as some student support service people. But to a lesser extent, it's the technology folks, in my view, at least. Curious about what all your thoughts are. Is it worthwhile that we advocate that building the technology infrastructure and keeping it be a key ingredient of sustaining stability through transition?
So this is Ed kind of weighing in. I was just kind of thinking about the question. I believe it comes down to, do you have a question that you're trying to answer? If the ability to respond to an organizational need is, if you believe it's contained within, then there's not a lot of impetus for changing how you do what you do. But if you're trying to get at something that's beyond your scope, and it's something that as organizational leaders, we've said that this is where we're going and this is why we need to do it, then the worthwhile question, as someone mentioned before, we look at it from student level, return on PELT, we look at return on investment. Then those type of questions become germane to the discussion, because you have something that you are trying to accomplish.
So you would frame the question in terms of maximizing our return on investment.
I would frame it as, do we see is there where are we trying to go? Is there somewhere that we're trying to go that we can't go without changing what we're doing?
Yeah. So that
is yes. But Sarah, jump in.
Oh, okay. So I was just wondering, like, just thinking about what Jeff said and what you just said, kind of framing. So Jeff was talking about needing strategies. Maybe one of those strategies, it sounds like from Ed, is to, really create a framework around the questions that we have that we can't answer doing business as usual right now, and thinking about where are the pieces that we really can't get that information that to support students in that transition process. We could really make a strong case around that. Then that might encourage different organizations to come together to do the data sharing. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Right. There has to be. So I would say, just using our lived experience, we started our process last year. But last year was more of, there was a general understanding like, wow, wouldn't this be a great idea to be able to pass information back and forth to, in general, talk about things that would be beneficial for us all? Yeah, in general, it sounds great. But then when you start realizing that on the university side, they have to start changing some of their systems, and on our side, we have to start modifying some of our systems, and And then we started looking at leveraging, does this change that we're making for the sake of this data sharing agreement have other benefits? And if it doesn't, then that makes it more expensive change. And then you have to ask if the question that I'm trying to ask really worth me making this change. And so then we started looking at how does that initiative fit with other initiatives that we're doing, that it is something that we really need to invest our resources. So, for example, our district, so to kind of put a fine point on it, so we administered the SAT, for example, and for every junior last year took the SAT in our school district. We made a district-wide decision to do that. We paid for it. And so now coming to the school year, every senior, 86% of our seniors, because not some kids were absent, 86% of our incoming seniors have an SAT score. Now we have 1,000 kids who are eligible based on their A through G and their SAT. We have 1,000 kids now that are eligible at the beginning of their senior year to matriculate to a CSU, California State University. They've already met the index. Now it's a bigger discussion for us. We need to make sure that those kids, one, are indeed applying, that we have verification from the CSU that they are applying, that their scores on their English and math tests are being treated appropriately. They're not being misplaced into remedial classes. You can see it start taking a different meaning for us because it wasn't a one-off initiative. But if it's only a one-off initiative, it becomes difficult to make that type of dedication to the resources.
Thank you. I'm wondering if there's any other strategies, Jeff, and maybe that you were thinking about, but other strategies that people have used or seeing that are at least maybe in the nascent stage of working around those, really trying to get the technical challenges and the human challenges in creating these data sharing agreements. Because I think, Jeff, the other thing that you were talking about is that, that turnover piece is big. You can work a lot with a certain group of people, and then a couple leave and the whole entire thing kind of falls apart. So are there other strategies for thinking about the longevity of these kinds of data sharing agreements? Jenny, do you have examples? I'm going to call on you. Sorry.
Sorry, I think I was muted. I'm still trying to figure out. I got a new computer. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
So one general thing, right? There's two things that have to happen for success down the road. One is we have to understand the relationship between the operational data from both, years ago, K-12, and the linkages with some of the outcomes, down the road outcomes, whether it's wage and labor data or higher ed data, higher ed outcomes. There has to be some relationship there that we think we now understand that we didn't know about before, that has some benefit, but we can leverage that relationship to improve something in society. That has to happen. That's a research and analytic capability. And most people that are doing the work day to day, week to week, they just want to know what they should care about. But that doesn't tell them how can they think about their jobs or doing their jobs differently. So that's the second question. One is, here we want to work on this because it's related to this outcome down the road. Then the second question is, well, how are you supposed to do that? So being user-centered around what are the use cases is really important because that's going to ground you for the infrastructure work that you're doing. And it's also going to set you up for guiding like how you do communication, how you embed training within sort of people's day-to-day jobs and things like that. So it's not just this thing standing out on the side and nobody ever goes to it because it's not related to anything else they ever do in their jobs. So I guess I would just summarize that. It's like, be really focused on what it is you expect people to do differently. And obviously, everybody on this call is going to say, well, that's justified because we have some important question that we've got answered, but that also has to be in place.
Right. And it sounds like from both you and Ed, like thinking about that integration, that it can't be the one-off, that it has to be, you know, this affects lots of different.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you just think about who your users are, what are their jobs like, and how is it that this technology or this research panel or this data display is going to help them do their day-to-day jobs better or more efficiently, or help them enable them to do something new that they couldn't do at all before.
Mm-hmm. Which is slightly different than thinking about just a cost analysis or return on investment.
Yeah, that's right. It's another level. Yep.
So you've added another goal, essentially.
I would add one thing to the point Jeff was making. This is Nate, again, at National Louis. At my previous position, I was in a outside partner organization. I was at the University of Chicago, and we had a data sharing agreement with Chicago Public Schools. And I would just say, in addition to the point Jeff was making about really knowing your use cases well and planning towards them, I would almost add to that. Also, when you're kind of spinning out a project, you have some ability to create the use cases. And what I mean by that is there was a point I'm thinking of where our data sharing agreement was kind of in jeopardy for what I think would just be sort of very common or pedestrian reasons, which was just that, you know, some other stakeholder at the other organization said, you know, hey, why do we have to keep this thing open? You know, we think we can kind of meet this kind of need in-house. But the fact that the usage of the data was happened a couple times a year, and in the context of kind of like a very collaborated on and joint professional development effort by, you know, my former organization as the outside partner in the school district, is that we sort of had another stakeholder inside of the other organization that was, you know, going to kind of stick up for the way that, for the use case that we've been implementing. And what I saw, just kind of from my perspective, is that kept the data sharing agreement alive. So it's not just that we knew our use case really well, but one of our use cases was really fundamentally, you know, called on, you know, a department at the school district and a department at my organization to work really closely together on delivering a professional development. So like the fact that collaboration was so sort of built into the project, you know, allowed the use case to be resilient against, you know, what I imagine are kind of common questions that come up. You know, somebody else comes along and wants to sort of reopen the books on, is this necessary?
I'm curious, with respect to both of these goals, are you all suggesting that the return on investment needs to be clear not only to the school district, but also to the university? Because I think that's what Georgia State actually brings up. You know, their success with African American and low income students. You know, they view it as kind of a moral imperative in addition to everything else. But I think I am asking, not think, is that an underlying question that we have to demonstrate to post-secondary why it is useful for them to participate in these data sharing agreements?
So, Shannon, can I clarify real quick your question? When you say that, does that mean that out of the universities, the motivating factor, the most motivating factor would be the return on investment then? Because for like, I'm thinking in the K-12 case, there's not really a return on investment as far as monetarily, right? If they have more kids that are going to college and graduating.
It's really a social investment. It's not, I mean, the universities are going to toddle along with huge enrollment and then attrition. But I think, and this is just something that's occurred to me in this conversation, and I thank you all for it. You know, do we need to make the case, or does the case need to be made to universities and colleges as to why it's beneficial to them to engage in data sharing agreements?
Yeah, I'm curious as to, I know that there's some folks from Tennessee on this call. Like Tennessee, we have but it's a regional kind of Dallas County kind of push. We have the College Promise initiatives here, where I've had a kind of a problem with how they've advertised this to what I would consider first-time college consumers, right? They're saying, hey, college is free, and this is a last dollar scholarship. But it's not that college is free. These kids are entitled to a Pell Grant, but they're calling a Pell Grant a scholarship. They've done a lot of work in getting a lot of student awareness around this, and they've increased, let's say, enrollment at our local community colleges, but realistically, they've only produced 10 to 20% a graduation rate. And the average student who graduates from a Dallas County Community College is in debt 15 to 20K for a degree that costs like 3 to 4. And so, they're just giving, a lot of just unhealthy guidance of telling the kids to take out a Stafford loan on top of their Pell. And then, the average graduate finishes 90 some credits, even though they need just 60, right? And so they're taking 1.5x the coursework that they need. And so there's, and then I would say a lot of the costs, a lot of the increased revenues isn't going to instructional staff, it's going to, administrative staff or porting classes online to accommodate the influx of kids who need entry-level or remedial courses. And so all of a sudden, while you might increase your N size, both in and out, it is not, there has to be some stronger data analysis. And I do think what I think informs good data analysis in this day and age is this kind of return on investment. Really, are the dollars that are coming into the university system translating to outputs that are going to help a region or a state in terms of kids who are employable in new jobs. And what I don't want to have happen is for those increased revenues to go to administrative bloat or contracts that are super suspect with online porting companies that are moving coursework from in person to online, which a lot of the students at these universities or colleges have never taken an online course before, and it is not a modality that typically low-income first-gen students of color thrive well in. And again, that's the kind of focus that I think K-12 and universities need, because unfortunately there are entities out there that are looking to profit off of Pell and Stafford loans, and that is putting that is really creating an unhealthy practice and really taking advantage of uninformed consumers in the form of 18 and 19-year-olds.
Yeah, so it sounds like that return on investment then should not be for one particular section of that pipeline. It needs to be like, because that's the whole thing with happens with adult success, right? We want our kids who are going through the K-12 system to be able to have a working wage, a living wage, when they're done with this whole entire pathway. So, Joanna, it's what you're kind of thinking about when you're seeing return on investment is like that whole system piece, or even like how that affects the economy of the state, perhaps, and increasing the workforce?
Well, I'm thinking, I mean, the argument is normally made in terms of the workforce, but what I'm wondering about as a consequence of the wonderful observations in this work group are drilling down to an intermediate sector, and maybe Farron, who works across Alabama and other states, might want to jump in. But, what is the return on investment for universities? we do normally couch it, you know, the workforce in XYZ state will benefit by X million billion dollars if we have more kids who have XYZ degrees and so forth. But there's an intermediate argument which might say, what contributes to a university or college's health, if you will? And we need to get away, obviously, from having kids enrolled who take too many credits, pay their tuition, etc., and then drop out. But
Yeah, is there?
What is the value to the university or college so that we can induce them to do widespread data sharing agreements, if you want to get down to it, you know, in my view.
Joanna, I would just share with you some of the experience that we gained from the Helping Families Initiative, for example, was that the return on investment is huge, but the return on investment varies with the population or at least the entity that you're dealing with. And we explored options that helped us determine a return on investment for each segment within a community who had an interest. We partnered with the business school at the University of Alabama to help us monetize statistically, you know, what the impact of you know, dropout rates, youth crime, those kinds of things happen. So I'd simply add to the conversation that I do think return on investment is huge, particularly when you're looking at, you know, the communities, the engagement of an entire community. I'm intrigued by the conversation, and I want to focus just briefly on the leadership component. You know, to be an effective leader in today's market, I think an educational leader almost has to be an entrepreneur. There's a term that I came across in some reading not long ago. They referred to that kind of leadership as edupreneur individuals. And I do think that's critical. I think it's critical when you establish culture within an organization. I do think the culture can transcend the normal transitions, the change in leadership that occurs. So I do think there's a huge opportunity here to engage leadership, to train leadership, to not only be a promoter, but to be, you know, the instrument that can help this carry forth and you know, live beyond individual transitions and become a part of the organizational culture.
And that might get into, this is Sarah, real quick, just thinking about that leadership piece and who leaders need, and just kind of the things that other folks have talked about defining those use cases. Because if I'm a leader and I'm trying to think about the best place to invest the money that I have, you know, and not just money, but the time and the resources, then I would want to know, like, okay, if I'm going to make this change, if I'm going to really focus on this data sharing agreement, then for all cases that this could apply for, not, again, off that somebody's going to do.
Dan Challoner, I want to jump in and ask you, because you've had long experience in one community about building these partnerships. And I'm curious, when you look at it from the perspective of, we need data to know how to help our kids better, and we're looking at return on investment. What are your thoughts?
Hello, Joanna. This is Keith on behalf of Dan.
Okay.
Dan had to step out.
Okay.
So, so our thoughts on return on investment and data. So we are a state that also offers free college, or 2 years of free college.
Right.
And it's from an economic point of view, if we're going to talk return on investment, so far that initiative has not assisted or put into action any processes at the campus level locally that have increased that return. And instead of using a lot of statistical jargon, I will just say that a bad movie does not get better with more audience members. So especially if the amount to get in is highly variable. So that's kind of what has happened. We have had a little bit of uptick in our middle class, upper middle class students who are aware of a college opportunity, especially in rural communities. And we've had a little change in school-based college-going culture. But in terms of pure numbers, it hasn't panned out. So a lot of money has, from a return on investment point of view, a lot of money has gone in to promotion and programmatic changes that is yet to be realized on the back end.
That is such a good point, and I was totally laughing at your analogy there. But I wonder how, that accountability piece also, you could offer these kids free college. And same with the Pell, right? That you guys were talking about Texas. You can offer free college, but if the systems are still only graduating 20%, there's still a trade-off that student is making. Instead of, they could be working for those 2 years instead of they're, going to college for those years. That's a burden on that student too, of time lost in the labor force. But is there talk about accountability with some of those, or more visibility of kind of what's going on behind the screens of how they're changing things?
In Tennessee so far, or in Hamilton County specifically, the accountability is there, and it's good, but it's also the double-edged sword of accountability. It is forcing, again, that in-school college-going mentality, in that, for instance, we met with a group of college advisors yesterday, and we were showing them the Princeton Review, 287 or 387 best colleges, and the different surveys, and how to match students, because we have a college matching tool, but we wanted to get it kind of a cultural match and a best geographic match, all the different ways that a match can be made from student to college. And the advisors were indicating to us they did not have the time to use that kind of tool because they were so busy helping people fill out their paperwork for the Tennessee Promise Scholarship, which is what we call the last dollar scholarship here for the 2 free years of college, because it's a mandate in the accountability model for 100% of the kids to apply for that scholarship. So the principals are held accountable. They get dinged if 100% of their graduating seniors have not filled out that paperwork, which is, definitely keeps college on the forefront in the school. But it also, from a practical level and from a counselor's point of view and a student's point of view, it takes a lot of valuable time away from really using data in a thoughtful way to put a student in the best chance for success. And I don't know if that answers your question about accountability, yeah. But that's where we are accountability wise right now. In terms of accountability on the university side, they are still kind of in a honeymoon period, I would say.
And I don't want to take us too far off track, but I just find that really interesting what you do. Because in Oregon here we have the first, community colleges are free for any of the students in the state. So, but that doesn't mean that they're graduating more kids necessarily. So.
Right.
I just want to interject.
Can I just ask a question about that real quick? Is it truly free, or is it Pell grant funded?
I have not been working on that side as much, so I cannot tell you the details of that, but I can look it up and see. I think the state put a bunch of money towards it, but it might be more Pell Grant. It's for all ages, though. And so we did a study on it recently, real quick, and the findings were that the kids who were actually taking advantage of it were the kids who were more more affluent, and higher socioeconomic status. The kids who were lower socioeconomic status actually were not taking advantage of the program as much. So it kind of had a difference of the effects than what we were expecting.
That's really interesting. How about in Tennessee? Is it truly free, or is it leveraging Pell?
It doesn't leverage Pell. It's last dollar, and there's a formula that does allow for the reduction in some merit-based scholarships, state sponsored. So the state put money in, but if you quote unquote get Tennessee Promise money, then if you had another scholarship, for instance, a state-based scholarship that required a higher ACT score, your proportion of that money may be less because you're getting Promise. So it, by default, so it kind of counsels a student into maybe undermatching a little more than they normally would, because if they max out on the ACT and they're getting a lot of money in this great merit-based scholarship, but then they also get Promise, and to fund Promise they get a reduction in the other scholarship, that it doesn't make the best practical sense.
Yeah, and Keith, actually, it's Oregon Promise, so it must be. I bet those are similar.
I bet they are.
Joanna, do you want to? Because I know that we only have 11 minutes left.
Yeah, I guess
next
that
steps?
what I'd like to know, this is folks, big questions that we need to put on the table for other people. What arose for me, and I thought I knew this business for a long time, but I was surprised that this is the first time came up to me. What are the benefits to a university in a data sharing agreement with the district? Because we need to look at both sides of the equation. And I know how hard and difficult it can be to get data sharing agreements, having been through a number of them. So that, to me, is a big question. And then this question of return on investment, which is usually posed in terms of workforce. But I'm thinking, for the university, and we've seen it for the schools, but what is the return on investment for university? And I would love to know the other questions that have popped up in your mind. I also want to just say very briefly, I think everybody should talk with Sacramento, Vincent Harris and Ed Eldridge. They have a super packet to examine and help students decide on or think about, reflect on, where they're going to go to college. So their emails should be on all your emails, but if you want to know them, I will send them to you again, and just want to refer you to them, and I hope they don't detest me for giving them additional mail in their inboxes. But returning to the big questions, return on investment, benefit to university, what are the cases we need to make on this point? The whole point, using data to support student success.
Joanne, this is Kathleen. There's a couple of things I would wonder if people have heard about or taken advantage of. And one of them, for example, is the National Student Clearinghouse. And this is a lot of universities belong to this, and I think it says like 3,600 universities belong to it now. And they offer a lot of services in terms of being able to provide research to universities as well as high schools about the students that are reported in that system, and also their pathway into the workforce. So that's one. But I'm also thinking of, you know, I know it's a big deal in California, and it's been happening here in Texas, where there are local consortiums of high schools and local colleges to try to improve the articulation of courses between K-12 and higher ed, and the sharing of data, you know, among them about which students are taking which courses and what happens to them when they enter a, you know, supposedly the course that's they should be taking in college, and whether or not they have to go off and take remedial courses seems to be a big concern to them, you know, and a benefit to the colleges to help them streamline and make sure that they're not having to offer so many remedial courses. So there is certainly for them a return on investment there of having that kind of conversation and relationship with the schools. I think this is a pretty much a statewide program in California they've been doing for quite a while between K-12 and colleges.
Well, and just to add on to that,
go ahead.
Just real quick, just to add on to that, even the transferability of credits between the colleges, particularly between community colleges and going into the university systems, are there already some, you know, agreements set up, articulation agreements on what transfers as what between those systems? I think that's kind of in that sphere as well. We're working with some tribal universities in the state of Montana, and that's it. They're not in the NCPS data, and so we're trying to create some of those data sharing agreements right now between them, just to, you know, make sure that kids can transfer a little bit easier.
Yeah, I don't think I'm sorry. Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say, I think it's getting more and more clear that universities are getting bad press because when they're only graduating 35% of the students who enroll, and there is, you know, a public pressure on them. There may not be the formal accountability yet for them, but a rising level of public accountability in terms of, you know, requiring them or them wanting to improve that, to improve their desirability as a place to go. That's, I think, another benefit to colleges.
Yeah.
Those are really good comments. Just a little side note on the National Student Clearinghouse data. It is the only game in town for the higher ed stuff. And there's a pretty good paper out there that takes a look at the way that data is collected. There's quite a bit of variation around the edges in terms of the optional data elements. I'll have to dig up the site. I want to say it was Gleason. It might have been Dynarski. It's a year or two old. And it's basically just a pretty in-depth sniff test of the National Student Clearinghouse data, kind of from a research perspective, like, is there the opportunity for bias to be implicit in this data set based on just strictly how it's collected? And the answer is probably yes. So I'll send out the link to that paper. It's been a year since I looked at it, so I don't remember the site.
That would be great.
Sure. And I would say that, I mean, the challenge with the National Clearinghouse data to me is that they don't track transfers. And what is becoming completely evident is, you know, 50% of the country's students go to community colleges. Right now, matriculation out of community colleges is about 6 to 20%. If we want to actually confront the real ugly facts. And we really need to distinguish between the 4 years and the 2 years as we think about it. Because what states like California have done, and North Carolina have articulated very clear transfer pathways. And that may be something we all need to look at. But we can't forget that 50% of the kids are going to community colleges, and we've got to know where they're going. And so somehow in our data sharing agreement, we've got to be looking at that. And to me, that's a third kind of hole for all of us to be thinking about. And then that segues into a fourth, which is high school guidance for students as a recommendation. How do you navigate transfers? I don't think we necessarily include that. And I know we didn't include it in our first draft about, college navigation that we did in the framework last year. So as I've listened to all of you, I'm thinking, whoops, we need another bullet point here. And what I'm hoping is that all of you will be thinking about where are the pieces that we need to build up in college navigation, and then, for instance, district and university collaboration. Let's just fight off two things first. We'll lose workforce next stage. My thought.
And Joanna, could I add just one thing to that? Like, if I'm just thinking,
Absolutely.
I think that defining those user cases for the K-12 and defining those user cases for the post-secondary would also help develop that framework a little bit more too. What are those motivators for both of those types of organizations and institutions to collaborate together?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I sure hope all of you will send in your thoughts to me and Sarah. What should we follow up on? We'd like to do that. We're going to welcome you in November in Baltimore, but in the meantime, what do we follow up on? What haven't we thought about?
Well, this has been a really great discussion. Yeah. Any last thoughts?
Go ahead. I'm signed off for today.
Gotcha. I was just saying this has been a really interesting and thoughtful conversation. I really appreciate everybody coming on and really joining in.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Bye-bye. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.